This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com. And today I have a guest that many of you have requested. He's living in the UK right now. He's probably best known for his time in WCW, but he's also wrestled all over the world. None other than the rap master himself, PN News. How are you doing tonight, sir?
Yo, baby, yo, man, living large. How
What
you
are you?
doing? I'm
I'm
finally
doing.
glad. I'm finally glad we're getting to get an opportunity here, man. It's haven't been giving you the runaround, but I've had a lot of things going on, so finally glad to have the chance to talk to you, bro.
Me too. And you're in the UK right now. What brought you over there? I know you were wrestling as the American Avalanche for Brian Dixon for a while, but it seems like you're permanently residing there now.
No, I'm actually in Germany,
Oh,
and I speak
Germany.
the language Yeah, I speak the language fluently. I have a my daughter is Austrian and my grandchild is Austrian, so I ended up marrying a German here in North Germany, and so I've got the best of both worlds. I'm in Germany, and I get to see my grandchild and my daughter a little bit more often than I would if I was still living in the States.
Are you still wrestling at all?
No, no. The bones have told me enough is enough. Basically, what happened about 2016, I had my last match near Graz, Austria, and I basically have been doing other things since then. So yeah, I just had a hip replacement last year. I'm waiting on my next hip replacement, and then two more. I've got two more hip replacement or two knee replacements that are come up after that.
That's not too bad actually for decades in the ring. A man of your size. I know you also played football and other sports. Could you tell us a little bit about what sports you did before wrestling?
Oh God, I when I was a younger whippersnapper, I did a lot of swimming. I guess it was because I was buoyant, but I was one of the top swimmers, and I was the top swimmer in my age group. Me and one other fella. My best strokes were backstroke and freestyle. So I did the intermediate medley relays, and I actually freestyle and backstroke. I got most of my ribbons were all first and second place. Our swim team, in the time I was with the swim team, we were undefeated in all categories. We won all our swim meets, and then after that, I played basketball, baseball, did all the great things growing up as a kid in the Midwest, and then I played football throughout junior high, college, or high school, and I actually got a scholarship, couple of scholarships to Division II schools, and I also played, but I ended up going to NAIA Division I, Kearney State College, which is now Kearney University of Nebraska. And then my sophomore year, I transferred into the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, and I was scheduled to walk on as a defensive lineman for the University of Nebraska Cornhuskers, and I ended up leaving school, and then about 6 months later, well, 8 months later, I had my first wrestling match, and the rest is history.
And I understand you were discovered in an unusual way. Somebody that knew Brad Reagans, who's a longtime trainer of many of the top stars, including the Nasty Boys and Vader, saw you working as a bouncer, I guess, and ended up hooking you up with the wrestling school.
Oh, absolutely, that's right. So I was in. I left school. Like I said, I left school, and I was doing a road trip, and I was visiting some ball players that I knew at the University of Wisconsin, and I ended up going into a bar one night and helping the bouncers throw somebody out. And the guy at the door, the guy who owned the bar, Bucks Madison Square Garden, he offered me a job on the spot. So I took him up, and I stayed in Madison for a little while. And when I'd been there for a couple months, and there was a straight state treasurers convention. So all the state treasurers in all 50 states were there on the Capitol, and our bar was just straight down from the Capitol. So a couple of the state treasurers came in after their meetings during the day, and that night, I ended up throwing four guys out of the bar on my own. The other door was full. There were two doors. The bottom door was full, and the other bouncers were down there. And I was up on the top on my own. And this one guy threw a cheap shot and then tried to hightail it out the door. So I did like a Starsky and Hutch move over the back of a Lincoln, one of those big, long Lincoln Town cars. And I did a Starsky and Hutch move over the top of that, ended up tackling the guy in the street. And I got up and said, "Don't you ever come into my bar again. If I see your face, I'm going to beat it in." And the guy ended up taking off. But the thing is all the windows in the bar, you could see everything that was going out on the street. So when I walked into the bar, the place erupted like I was at a wrestling match. So everybody's going nuts. And then the state treasurer from Minnesota, a guy named Bob Matson, he says, "Hey," he buys me a couple of shots, and he says, "You ever thought about being a professional wrestler?" And I said, "No, not really." And he goes, "Well, if you ever do, here's my card. Give me a call. I can get you hooked up because Brad Reagan's has got a training camp right out there outside of in Plymouth, outside of Minneapolis." And the thing is, he was affiliated with Vern Gagne at the time, the AWA, and so basically I was getting news coverage because Bob Matson, as a state treasurer, his dad was also a politician, so he had all these connections, and the sports writers were writing about me in the local newspaper without me even having a wrestling match. And then I did some sports. I did some sports radio. I did a couple live interviews, and it basically forced Vern to actually hire me. So I started training in November of uh, of the year, and by the next year in March, I'd had my first professional match at the Minneapolis auditorium, and the house was up because I know that One Man Gang did a thing with the Guardian Angels. Well, I was the first to do that, and we did that in Minnesota. And Curtis Sliwa, I met him and his wife, and we ended up. They ended up bringing 12 Guardian Angels to escort me to the ring for my first ever professional wrestling match.
Were the Nasty Boys still around the training school when
I
you did that?
was Yeah, they were helping train and stuff like that. They were living at Brad's. Brad had an apartment downstairs, and they were living in the apartment, and they were help train. In fact, Brian Knobs was. Me and Brian were married a little bit. We were doing the opening bouts on some of the house shows around for the AWA. So yeah, Brian and I were working with each other in those early days.
Did they ever rib you or anything? Because they were known for
Of
that.
course they did. Yeah, we did a. Well, it's the jury's still out. So I was in Grand Forks, North Dakota. It was just it was really one of my first shows. Thank God I'd already done the TV out in. I think I'd already done the TV out in Vegas, where we were at the steamboat out there back in those days. And what had happened was. I was in Grand Forks. I didn't have a hotel. I didn't know. I knew nothing about how the guys drove to the show or any of that crap. I was green as the grass, and so I got to the show, and Henning says, "Hey, where are you staying tonight?" Because we were on a little loop. And I said, "Well, I haven't got a hotel." He goes, "Well, come over to where the boys are staying. We're staying in this hotel, blah blah blah." And so I got there, and there were no rooms available. He said, "Don't worry about it. You can sleep on the floor of one of the boys' rooms. It's not a problem." So we got into the bar, and it's like a who's who. There's Buddy Rose, who was one of my later tag team partners out in the Pacific Northwest. Buddy Rose, Doug Summers, Colonel De Beers, Larry Zabisco, Kurt Hennig, Jimmy Snuka, the Rockers. I mean, it was a who's who of professional wrestling over the next 10 years, basically. and the Nasty Boys or Brian was there, yeah, and Sags was there as well. And so anyway, I was, I've been known to drink a few beers, and I'm pretty good at drinking beer, to be honest. And so what had happened was every time I drink with one of the guys, somebody would get my attention, and then all of a sudden my beer would be foaming over. Now I'm not. I was born in the morning, but not that morning, and I kind of knew what was going on, but I just said the hell with it. So by the end of it, I'm sure I had about 11 halcyons in my beer, and we went back to the rockers room, and there was a bunch of us, and I was playing poker with Henning and Zabisco and De Beers, and they took me for my wages that night, and then I ended up passing out on the floor of the rockers room there. So next morning I woke up and I had to piss. So I got up and I took a piss, and I kept rubbing my eyes like this. I kept rubbing myself. It was kind of numb. I didn't know why. I didn't even think about it. I just kept rubbing that, and I'm pissed. And so I'm gonna wash my face, and I splash some water on my face, and then I look up in the mirror and I go, God damn it, the bastard's got my eyebrows. so about 10 seconds later, knock, knock, knock. It's Henning's knocking on the door, and he's going, "What's going on? What's happening?" Like he didn't know, because I'm sure they were all there, right? So, like, and Henning was known for that kind of stuff too. So, I was kind of laughing it off, but I had to do something because I had no eyebrows and I had a line shaved down the middle of my head. So I ended up going to the barber, and I did like a reverse mohawk, and then I had the eyebrows. There were some girls around, and they painted some eyebrows on on my brow there. And I mean, when Greg Gagne saw me that night, because he was working and he was an agent, right? When he saw me that night at the show, he just shook his head. It was pretty hilarious. But yeah, it's just one of those things. And I mean, I'm sure Henning might have started it, but I'm sure the Nasty Boys finished it. So that was funny. It was just, and then Henning pulled me to the side that night, and he goes, because they'd been ribbing me, they've been padlocking my bag to water pipes and stuff like that, as they do to the greenhorns, trying to get them wound up, and it's that ribbing era. And Henning goes, you know what? That was the greatest thing. You just laughed it off. Nobody's going to be ribbing you anymore, and that was a fact, man. He never nobody ribbed me in the company anymore until I ended up going out to the Pacific Northwest about a month and a half later.
So you were there in the AWA towards the end. How was your
Yeah.
experience working there overall?
Well, I was so green. I really not much of experience. It was just great to meet guys like Bull Power. I met Otto Vance, who I eventually ended up working for. I met him in Vegas on the TVs. It was just amazing to me because I was green, and a lot of these guys that I was working with and working around and on the bill with, driving down the roads with eventually, they were all guys that I was watching on TV, a couple years earlier. So it was kind of a surreal moment for me. I mean, the Super Ninja, Shinji Takano, Mr. Saito. I think we Ken Patera had come out of jail, and he was working with us for a little while. Like I said, Jimmy Snuka, Henning. I mean, it doesn't get much more interesting than that. And yeah, it was a surreal place, but I really didn't start learning the business until I went out to Portland, Oregon.
And everybody speaks highly of the Portland territory. How was your experience there working for Don Owens?
I loved it. Don Owens was really a brilliant promoter. He was a great guy, and he was a big supporter of me. He took care of me. I mean, I started out there as a baby face, but they didn't have any big heels to work with me, so I ended up getting my notice. And then basically, and Lynn Denton came in, took the book off of Rip Oliver, and basically they gave me my notice, 2 weeks notice. And then Don goes, Jesus Christ, Lenny, you ever think about turning the kid heel? and then that clicked off, and then they turned me heel and put me with Chris Colt. And if anybody knows Chris Colt, tremendous bump taker, great worker, but a hell of a drama queen. And so I did some stuff with him, picked up some stuff with him. I later tagged with Mike Golden, and Mike Galloway, he taught me a lot about tag wrestling. So I really got into the basics of the tag, of the psychology of the tag match, which was really fun for me. And I really enjoyed doing tags. And then when me and Mike did our split, he went babyface and I stayed heel. We had a little bit of a run against each other, and then Mike was out of the territory, and Buddy had just come in, and he was doing singles and stuff. And I said to Lenny, we were driving down the road, I said, Lenny, I got an idea for Len Denton, the grappler. I said, I got an idea for a tag team. He goes, what is it? And I said, well, um, I said, I want to call it the Beach Boys, and it could be me and Buddy, because I had bleached blonde hair at the time. I said me and Buddy could go out there, Bermuda shorts and everything like that, and we could go out there and wrestle. So Lenny loved it. He pitched it to Don. Don loved the idea. So without any photos, they pitched it like this new great tag team was coming into the Pacific Northwest. Don Costas, he goes, and there's a new tag team coming out to the Pacific Northwest. They're going to be starting in 2 weeks' time. Get your tickets early. It's the Beach Boys. They're coming up from California and all this. It was great, right? So the next week, oh, we still ain't got any pictures, but the Beach Boys are going to be here next week. So that next week, the house was up. It was up considerably, and Fat Boys Wipeout, two fat guys. What a deal, right? Fat Boys Wipeout was the music I picked out, and I brought that in. And when that music started playing, the people went nuts. And when Buddy and I came out with beach towels and Bermuda shorts on, the people were so pissed off. And then we did our little run and drew a couple houses with Steve Dahl and Scott Peterson, the Southern Rockers at the time. So that was pretty good. And I did a lot of TV title matches with Dave Sierra, the Cuban Assassin. We had some great coal miners gloves matches out there. And Don always looked after me. It pissed some of the older guys off, because when I would work with these guys like Dave and stuff like that, they were getting babyface money from merchandise and stuff like that. Nobody was buying heel merchandise at that time. So Don would always look after me and always paid me. He always paid me a little bit extra money, to balance out for not being able to sell any merchandise. But he took care of me. We went to the NWA came out for one of those Great American Bashes, and they needed Don's ring. And Don said, "Okay, only if you use some of our guys." So they gave us 3 matches, and I was on one of those matches with Billy Two Eagles, and we had a nice little match. And I mean, guys were coming up to me after the match and shaking my hand, saying, "Great match, kid. That was pretty cool. That was super." All this crap, and for me, it was great. It was up in Seattle, but the funny thing about it is, Don was putting me over to the NWA, say, but you can't have him. I need him for the Christmas show and all this stuff, and so don't think about taking him away from me. Well, I missed my meet to go with Lenny, and I just bought a car. Well, the radiator was messed up, and so I ended up driving up there with a messed up radio from Portland to Seattle. I ended, I ended up having to stop about 6 times, put water in the radiator to get all the way up there, and they're panicking. I wasn't going to get there. So my first show for a major company like the NWA, I was I was I was on first, and I got there. I had about I had about 8 to 10 minutes to get my gear on. I got my gear on and went out there and performed, and still had a good match. But it's action under pressure. I think that's always a key thing, right?
Yes, and of course, Billy Jack Haynes is known from that area. I don't know if he was still around at that time, but he's popular on this channel. Did you ever have any run-ins with him?
Yeah, well, I worked out in his gym a little bit and stuff like that. And Billy Jack ran opposition, and he brought in a bunch of ex New York guys and stuff like that. And I had no problem with Billy whatsoever. But he kind of did an article. There was an article about when he started opening up opposition. Well, we had Channel 42, and he was running on a different channel, and he kind of said you can't make chicken salad out of chicken shit, which is what he was calling our program, right? But at the time, the funny thing about it, he was calling us chicken shit, but we were going up head to head on that. That was when the WWF had the Saturday night main event once a month on NBC, and we were actually our ratings were higher than theirs on that Saturday. They only did one Saturday night. We were on every Saturday night, and we were going head to head, and we actually were outrating the WWF at the time in the Portland, Oregon area, and so it kind of blew our minds, but it kind of set a fire under all of us because half the team was young. There were a lot of greenhorns on the team, and we had good leadership and Lenny and Don and stuff like that. Dave Sierra and Matt Bourne was out there, buddy. Those guys, they kind of held our nose to the grindstone, and we succeeded, but there was no ill feelings. It was just all about business. And I saw some of the guys that I knew, like Nails, and some of those other guys, yeah, that I'd known from AWA and I'd met along the road and stuff like that. And I got along with everybody, man. It was pretty cool.
What was Matt Bourne like to be around in real life?
Matt Bourne was one of those guys. He could be a spoiler if he wanted to, but I used to have some good matches with Matt. And then when me and Matt were together in WCW, he was doing the Big Josh. We ended up driving. We ended up in cars a lot together, and we ended up splitting rooms a bunch and stuff. I got along with Matt, but Matt was. He was a stinker. He could spoil a match if he wanted to, but he generally worked pretty hard with me. So it was interesting, but not everybody got along with him.
And Nails is probably known for his behind the scenes fight with Vince McMahon. Did he?
Right.
What was he like? Was he really like an angry person outside of the ring, or was he just a normal guy that had
when
a little thing?
when I first met him in the AWA, I really thought he was an angry person, but when I was talking to him after that in up in the Pacific Northwest and stuff like that, he was just an easygoing light guy. He was I mean, it was probably because he didn't know me at that time back in the AWA, right? But he saw that I was, I could I could take the crap, and I didn't let it get to me. And he kind of just he warmed up to me, and so by the time he was out in Portland, we were getting along pretty well. But I mean, that was the last time I've seen him.
And you went on to the Catch Wrestling Association, which I guess was in Germany at that point, and it was very popular. Could you tell us a bit about that? And you came up with the name Cannonball Grizzly there. How did you come up with that name?
Well, see, I'll tell you what, that the old CWA was fantastic. We used to wrestle 8, 9 months a year, and we would start in maybe some small town, maybe outside of Dortmund. We'd start in the end of April or something, and we'd do like a 3-day tournament in a tent there, and then we'd end up heading down to Linz, Austria, which is the northern Austria. And we'd go down there and we'd do 4 weeks there, then 3 weeks in Graz. We'd do 2 months in Vienna. Then we'd head to Saarbrücken, Austria, which is that was like our vacation time because it was nestled up into the Alps, and the water was crystal clear. You could see 30 yards down into the water, 30 meters into the water. You could see the fish swimming around under you when you were out there. And then after Saarbrücken, we'd head up to Hanover, Germany, and we do like almost 2 months in Hanover, and then after Hanover we would go to Dortmund and do 10 days in Dortmund, and then we'd finish off in Bremen with 5 weeks. And in those days it was fantastic. I remember we would our halls would be full. We would be in the Liebenau ice holly in Graz, and that hall would be full 3 4 days a week, and we were running 7 days a week in there, you know, running angles, running stories and stuff like that. And that was 3 weeks long. The ice hall, it was an ice hall in like a hockey ring in Linz as well. And then we were on an outdoor tennis arena in Vienna, right? It's called the Heumark, and there we would, we'd have anywhere. Like I said, those they were pretty good sized venues. Even Ice Holly was like 3 or 4 thousand people fit in the venue. In Vienna, Austria, is outdoor venue. You get 3,500, 4,000 people there. The tents in Hanover were 2,500, 3,000 people. And in Bremen, it was like 3,000 people until the last night. And the last night we would do the big hall, and the big hall held like 10,000. So, I mean, we were doing tremendous business. And I'll never forget one time when Vader, who was known as Bull Power over there, Bull Power came into Vienna to do a title match with Big Otto, and the people were climbing over the walls to to see this because it was a sold out show. And it was, I mean, it was just phenomenal, and it was like that the whole year long. And we had so much fun, and there wasn't as much traveling because you were staying in the same town. You know, we'd be on a camping platz about 25 minutes outside of Vienna for 2 months, man. We were living the life, actually living the dream. We go over to Hungary on our day off on Mondays when we had our day off. We go over to Hungary and we'd go shopping and we'd eat, and everything was cheap over there because it was still part of the Iron Curtain. And that was great. I mean, it was great. And then when Otto kind of retired and Bull wasn't coming around, then Finley and a guy named Tony Sinclair, myself and Rambo, Mantar, which would be Mastino over there, guys like that. We ended up taking over the reins with a couple Germans like Ulf Hermann and an Austrian named August Miesel, and we kept drawing cards, but the problem is we were going up against the TV, and the WWF eventually started coming over, and that was affecting us because what was on the TV. And then as far as me, my name Cannonball Grizzly was excuse me, sorry about the light there. So what happened was I went over there the first time, and Bremen. How it happened was I ended up. I was in Portland, Oregon, and going back to Portland again. So I'm working my butt off, and Fujinami from New Japan comes over, and he's doing like a worldwide tour, making these stops. And he came in to wrestle Lynn Denton for the Pacific Northwest title, and he saw me wrestle, and he goes to me, he goes, I think you next Bam Bam Bigelow, Japan, because Bam Bam Bigelow started in New York, right? He was working for the WWF then at the time. And so I said, well, it sounds good to me, but I'd rather just be the Avalanche because that's what I was wrestling as, is Paul the Avalanche out there. And he said, so he laughed at that, and then he left Portland and he went over to wrestle in Hanover. And so Big Jim Harris, Kamala, ended up having to fly back to the States. So he left the territory, he left the CWA, and Otto needed another big man for Bremen. So what happened was Fujinami had my photo, gave it to Otto, and Otto remembered me from the AWA, and he goes, okay, great. I just had my phone turned on Portland one day earlier, and he called me. He says, I want you to come to work for me in Bremen. You'll be there 5 weeks and this and that. So, I mean, I didn't even have a passport at that time. And so basically I got I got my passport done. And when he brought me over, instead of calling me Avalanche, he called me Paul the Grizzly. And so after my first night there, he already asked me to come back for the following season. And And then when I came back the next season, they said, and I didn't speak any German at that time, and I came back for the next season, and all of a sudden Peter Williams, which was he was also one of the promoters in Germany at the time, he goes, he says we're going to call you Kugel Grizzly, and I go, and I was like, what the hell is Kugel? He says, well, it's like a cannonball because you're fast and it's like you're a shot out of a cannon. And I went, why don't you just call me Cannonball Grizzly then? Because I'm an American, right? So he kept calling me Kanun and Kugel, and I just thought it was just so, yeah, the name was just way too long. So every time I got on the microphone to do an interview, I kept calling myself Cannonball Grizzly because I'm an American, right? So finally he gave in and he let me call myself Cannonball Grizzly. So yeah, that's kind of how the Cannonball Grizzly thing came along.
And I guess it wasn't too long after that that you got the call from WCW. How did you get recruited over there?
Well, when I with the WCW thing, how I did that was I was at Randy Colley, one of the Moondog Rex. He was over in Europe. He was in Germany with me, and he said, "Hey, listen, let's give Ole Anderson a call because Ole was had the book in the WCW at that point." And he gave Ole Anderson a call, and and so we called him from a phone booth in Germany, and Ole was all for it. He really didn't know much about my work, but on the recommendation of Randy Colley, he said, "Yeah, come on in. We'll get you started." And in that time, from when we called him at the beginning of like December, end of November, he ended up getting the sack, and then they brought in Dusty Rhodes. Well, Dusty Rhodes was finishing up in the he was finishing up in the WWF. He had the Royal Rumble, one of the first Royal Rumbles, and he was doing that Sapphire. Where's my sweet Sapphire? He was doing all that stuff, and he was wearing the polka dots. And what happened was he was finishing that, and in January, when I was back in the States, they gave me a dark match, and it was in like Macon, Georgia, or something like that. And I went in there and I tore up a dark match with one of the enhancement guys, and you know, Dusty had seen the tape, and he said, "Oh, that's great." He said, "I want you to be patient because I want to bring you in, but just need to be patient." So the first guy he brought in was his kid, Dustin, and then he brought in Matt as Big Josh, and then I was the very next guy that he hired, and they had me doing that. They had me doing the thing with the Great American Bash. They had me go in there and I did a rap for the Great American Bash, and they'd filmed it like it was like a rap video and everything, and that was pretty cool. And they were airing it on TV already, and they didn't have me on contract. So the higher ups, the lawyers are going to Jim Herd and does. You need to get these kids on contracts now because this isn't gonna work. So so they offered us these basic contracts, and I know like Scott Hall and Austin and you know Mark Marrow, the Patriot, and those guys. We all got the same contract at the same time, and they all signed theirs right away in the office. And I said, you know, I took the thing with me. Well, I was living 2 hours away from Atlanta, and they said, so I got back home after that office on Friday, and Magnum TA says, hey, you know, he calls me, leaves a message. He says, hey, you know, there ain't going to be any second chance if you don't sign that contract. You know, you know that's it. You know, we ain't going to deal anything with it. I had him by the balls, and I didn't even. You know, I didn't even really know it because I was already on TV, so I could ask. I could ask what I wanted, you know, at that point. And so, like I said, I had the contract with me and didn't sign it. And then I had to go do a rap in the Omni that Sunday. And I ran into Dusty at the hotel, the Ramada in Atlanta. And I said, Dusty, I'm just not impressed with this contract. And he goes, you know what, kid, I'm going to tell you what. You know, I'm not going to talk to you right now, but when we get to the Omni, then we'll have a conversation about the whole thing. So I said, all right, you know, fine. So he gets me to the Omni, and he puts me in one of these suites where all the people with real big money hang out, gold faucets and everything like that. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, I've hit the big time here, haven't I? Wow, you know. And so Dusty comes in and he gives me the whole spiel, and boy, can he talk. So he gives me a whole spiel and he says, you know what, kid, sometimes, if this doesn't work out, we'll try something else. You see, because sometimes, baby, you just got to trust somebody. And that was my first mistake. I ended up trusting Dusty, and I shouldn't have brought the contract with me. And I'll tell you why. Because I signed it and I handed it over to Dusty. And then I went home that night, and on my telephone was Chief Jay Strongbow. He says, Vince loves the gimmick. He wants you to start immediately. Give Pat Patterson a call tomorrow morning, because this was a Sunday. And yeah, I called Pat, but it was already too late because I'd already signed the contract for the WCW.
As far as that gimmick, was that your idea to pitch that, or who came up with that?
Yeah, the gimmick was mine, and I wanted to kind of do it as a heel, and it was Dusty that talked me into doing it as a babyface. But I think it would have got over a lot better as a heel. But that's hindsight's 2020. But when Dusty said he wanted to pitch it as a babyface, that was fine because I would have incorporated my Cannonball Grizzly character, my heel character is that I would have incorporated that kind of into um, the. Uh, the rap gimmick of the whole thing, but as we went babyface, and I was just uncomfortable as a babyface in the WCW at that point. I really, really wanted to be a heel because that's where I succeeded. It was a couple years later when I went back to England and I was doing some stuff in Europe when I really started to get comfortable as a 400 pounder being a baby face because it's not the easiest thing in the world. For a 400 pounder is bigger than all your opponents to learn how to babyface a match.
Were you always doing raps and stuff and a fan of rap music before that?
I was doing some raps, but my biggest problem with WCW was when I did the when I did the when I went out and did my first raps. There were no play speakers by the ring. So what would happen? And it took a while for me to get used to this. And once I did, I was nailing the rap. Before that, I was struggling with the raps, to be honest with you, because without the playback speakers, I'm in these big, huge arenas. And so I'd hear the music, right? And then I'd start doing my rap, and my voice would come out of the speakers about a half a second later, and it threw me off. And until I got used to that, it was messing me up. So I think had I had the opportunity, had I gone to Vince at that point, I think he'd have given me a lot more help because there was just way too many Chiefs and not enough Indians in the WCW back in those days.
Who was above Dusty in those days? Like,
Everybody had a
like who?
different agenda. You know what I mean?
Okay. You did feud with Steve Austin before he went off and became Stone Cold. Any memories of working with Steve?
Well, it was just a short little run with Steve, but we were doing a feud for the TV title. And you know what? He'd only been in the job for about 2 years at that point, but you could tell that he was going to be a solid wrestler and stuff like that. And then when he got his chance in the WWE, he went for it, didn't he? So I mean, everybody there knew what a talent Austin was. There was no question about it.
As far as working with Terry Taylor, how did you find him?
Terry Taylor is a great worker and everything like that. There was an issue where I got accused of being a thief at that point, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I left the company, and which is a shame because I mean I've got a lot of sins to pay for, but that's not a sin. Those sins aren't mine, and I always said, Doesn't matter how many people believe a lie, it doesn't make it true. And as far as Terry goes, he was a great middle of the card wrestler. He could work with anybody, but if he would have tried to have been himself instead of trying to be Ric Flair, he'd probably done a lot better.
Yeah, speaking of that, a fan actually asked you about that. Why do you think you were accused of that? And do you think it was somebody else that was just kind of throwing all the blame on
Well,
you for whatever reason?
well, what was happening is I guess there was some jewelry and money was going missing in the locker rooms, and I wasn't even aware of the crap. And then what happened was we were over in England, and me and Terry and Big Cat, which was what was his name, Mr. Hughes, we were sharing a dressing room in Sheffield, England. And the guys knew I didn't have a credit card up until well, I just got my credit card right there before we were going to England. I'd done what we'd done is me and Johnny B. Bad and what's his name, uh, Jim Ross. Jim Ross. We all had to go to England. We went to England and did the pre-show interviews and stuff like that, and it went pretty good, right? And so we had to come back and we filmed some TVs in Georgia. And I went by my house, and then I had a secured credit card, so I had my secured credit card with me. So when I got over to England and stuff like that, we did two shows in London. Those went well. I worked with Rude and a couple other guys. I worked with Rude and Luger, one for the U.S. title and one for the heavyweight title. And then we went up to Sheffield, and that night in Sheffield, when we were at the show, Terry Terry's money went missing, and my money went missing. And so Terry came up to me and says, "Dude, do you see anybody go in the dressing room?" And I said, "No." And that's when I went in and checked my bag, and I had my money missing. And so I was like, "Fuck." So I was yeah, I was all pissed off. But what could you do? So we ended up. So at that point, after we went back to the bar at the hotel in Sheffield, I was down drinking beer in the hotel bar, and then the next day when I checked out, I put it on my secured credit card, right? Because I mean the company paid for the hotel room, but I paid for my own alcohol, right? So I did that, and so all the boys were acting weird as we were heading over to Ireland and stuff like that. I don't know. Somebody starts a rumor in wrestling, telephone, telegraph, tell a wrestler, and so basically the shit went down. And then when we got back to the States, me and Rude had a little bit of an issue in Atlanta filming the TVs one night, and he ended up giving me a black eye, right? And it was I had no problem with Rude, and Rude had no problem with me. And there was only about three or four people that in this whole business that actually know the truth about what happened that night. Henning, Paulie Dangerously was one of them, and everybody's kept their mouth shut about their damn crap. And half of the guys that know what was happening are dead. You know what I mean? Henning's dead, and Rude's dead. So there's me and Paulie, and if Paulie can back me up, but what the fuck. And so anyway, yeah, at the end of it, since Rude gave me a black eye, that was a whole thing. It started out, well, I went into Rude's bag. I didn't know where Rude's bag was. You know what I mean? I went into Rude's bag, and that's how the whole thing started. Then I heard all sorts of other stories and shit like that. I mean, my God, it was the Hardy Boys or something. It must be the greatest detectives in the world, man. So it's just, uh, it's just nuts. And like I said, I mean, it's all water under the bridge for me, and I don't give a shit because I mean, God's gonna judge me, but He's not gonna judge me on that shit. That's for sure.
Is that why you left WCW? You just didn't want to put up with that anymore?
No, my contract. They didn't want to renew my contract. So the contract was a rollover contract, and so they didn't want to renew it. And so I ended up in my, you know what? And I really wasn't worried because my daughter my daughter was being conceived at that point, and I was getting ready to move back to Europe. I was thinking about moving back to Europe, so I went back to Europe. I wrestled a little bit, and then I came back to the United States, and we were getting ready to move. So I was, getting stuff moved out of our property and selling stuff, and then I decided to go to the King of Ring in it was the first King of the Ring, and it was in Ohio, and they were doing a little loop, and that was back in the days when TVs weren't like Raw and what you see nowadays. It was all those pre-taped stuff, and so it was they did the King of the Ring, and then the next 2 days were filming TV. So I mean, I ran into Henning, and Henning goes, "Wow, that's really a shame about the shit with Rude, right?" And I was like, yeah, yeah, you know what I mean? So, that we had that conversation, and Sergeant Slaughter was in charge of Newtown at the time, and he comes up to me and goes, "Where you been, man? We've been trying to get a hold of you. We're looking for somebody to do a gimmick." And I said, "Well, I'm here now. I got my gear in the car." He goes, "No, no, we got that covered now. But here." And then Pat came over, and I talked to Pat, and Pat goes, "Introduce yourself to Vince. Vince likes that kind of stuff." So I mean, I talked to Pat, talked to Vince, and then Pat says, "Listen, we're not going to give you a dark match now, but just hang tight. Next month on the TVs, we'll bring you in, and give you a dark match, take a look at you and make sure, and then we'll find a spot for you." And I was like, "Okay, it sounds good to me. But I was just bullshitting because I was more worried about my daughter coming into this world. And I ended up, I wasn't going to wait around for a month not getting paid by anybody. So I knew I had a job waiting for me back in Europe. So I ended up going back to Europe, and my wonderful kid was born in '93, and she's all grown up, and she's given me a grandchild and stuff like that, and yeah. So I mean, it's kind of the rest is history there. But yeah, if they would have let if the contract roll over, if they would have took me on, I'd have tried to stay. I tried to work it out, man. But I kind of got blackballed and railroaded there, man. I guess they weren't liking. I don't know if they thought I had an ego or something like that, but I did everything that was asked of me. I can't tell you what they were thinking, but all I can tell you is that everywhere else I've been, I've worked my ass off. I was working my ass off there, and I tried to get along with everybody, but obviously I'm just obviously I'm a heat seeking missile.
Another guy that was a heat-seeking missile was Lex Luger that you mentioned that you worked with. How was he to work with?
He was hard to work with, but we did have a good match. And that was the only. I was God. I mean, here I was, 6 months in the company, and I'm working the world heavyweight champ for a title match in London, England. I mean, that's uh, that's pretty much hitting the top, right? Lex is, his work is what it is. You know what I mean? And you have to kind of work to his. Um, you got to work to his standard. You got to work to his abilities, and that's where I wish I really would have been I wish I would have been a heel because I could have led him a lot better as a heel. I mean, I learned to lead as a babyface, but I could have led him a lot better at that point if I would have been a heel in England instead of being a babyface.
Your last TV match was against Diamond Dallas Page, who you ended up beating. I guess they didn't care if you won on your way out.
Yeah,
Any memories of that and what DDP's done over the years? Because at that point, I guess he was just starting pretty late in the game.
yeah. I mean, DDP was doing the managing job. He managed the AWA. He was managing Scott Hall as the Diamond Stud, wasn't he? And so what I did was, I mean, he'd been training to wrestle because he wanted to be a wrestler, and so he was training to wrestle. And then so his first televised match was at one of those yeah, it was one of the semi-live events that they had on TBS. It was the Clash of Champions series, and it was in Topeka, Kansas. And so Dallas was one of those guys that you had to go over everything. Everything had to be laid out in the match. I like to improvise and do a lot of different stuff, but that was fine with me. So we laid out the match and we just did what we did, and it was simple enough. As long as nothing got screwed up, then Dallas never wouldn't have got lost. So nothing got screwed up, and then yeah, I pinned him with my top rope splash, and the rest is history. And then later on, the office changed there. Dusty was gone. Bischoff took over. He was buddies with Bischoff. He was sitting in on all the TV stuff anyway. So Dallas had an inside scoop, and I mean, yeah, he came on. He went up and he moved forward, and he got a nice little run and stuff like that. There were a lot of things around him that helped him, and yeah, God bless him, and I'm happy for him. And now he's got that DDP yoga, and I know he's helping a lot of people out. And God bless his can-damned heart. And I'm just, yeah, I'm happy that things are going well for him, man.
One guy he's tried to help a few times without success, I guess, is Mark Bagwell. You probably knew Marcus when he was younger. Any memories of him?
Not really. He was because Marcus was around, in the early stages and stuff like that. And I mean, as far as I knew, I got along with him. But he had a nice little run with Papa Pump, and he had his good things going on. He had a heck of a body on him. As he was to my face, he was always a legitimately nice guy, and yeah, I mean, uh, but other than that, I didn't really hang around with Marcus too much.
What do you think about John Cena ending up doing the rap gimmick, but getting a push with it a couple, or maybe, yeah, probably a little over a decade after you, maybe 10 to 15 years after you?
You're making me sound old, brother. So, but yeah, no, that was cool. I thought that one of the coolest things because I didn't, I was working all the time. I was working all the weekends, and I really didn't get a chance to see much of the product. Once in a while I check in and see what was going on. And I remember one somebody holding up a poster at one of the TVs, and I don't know if it was an insult to Cena or an insult to me, or it was just somebody being cute. But it was John Cena equals PN News, and I thought that was cool that somebody'd remember me, whether it was good or for worse or whatever. It was neat that somebody remembered me, and I mean, John Cena, he's known as the hardest working guy in the industry, so he obviously deserved it. And look where he's at now. So yeah, he deserved everything he's got, and I just. But it's neat, and like that Men on a Mission gimmick was the gimmick that they wanted to do with me. So the thing is I was the first rapping gimmick in the wrestling industry, and since then, it's been tried five or six or a dozen times. And Cena, they really pushed Cena with the thing. So obviously, I was on the right. Yeah, I was in the right trajectory with the idea in the first place. Maybe just a little bit before my time.
Yeah, a few fans have commented on Max Caster and Top Dollar of the newer generation, which you probably don't even watch anymore, I would imagine. They also do that gimmick. I was surprised to see you wrestled in ECW a little bit when I was researching you. How did that come up? I guess it was just a tour with them or something.
Oh no, I was there for about 6 months. I mean, I worked Sabu, I worked Awesome, I worked Van Damme, and then I got involved with the Baldies, and then I was doing the Baldy thing, and then we were doing, November to Remember '99 was a pay per view I did with the Baldies, and we worked New Jack and those guys. We had a nice little run. I mean, me and Big Vito, we get along together. We we're Vito and I did some stuff later on in Germany and stuff together. So me and Vito, yeah, we've become really good friends out of the deal. And then I had other friends there like Rod Price and stuff. And it was interesting. The reason why I'd went up, I was living in Atlanta at the time, and then I decided to go up to Philly, see what it was all about. And when I showed up, of course, as an old school wrestler, you take your gear with you. And Paulie says, Paulie loved me because everybody was telling me to hurt him in the WCW when I was doing these mixed tags. Me and Missy Hyatt against Paulie and Arn Anderson and Paulie and Terry Taylor. And we did this in the Meadowlands. All these guys did like Paulie. They were telling me to hurt him, in the deal. And I did, and I took care of him. You know what I mean? With my big splash, I took care of him, and he thanked me and thanked me and thanked me. And that's the first thing he said to me when we went up, when we were in the metal, when I was up there in Philadelphia. He goes, "Man, I'll never forget you taking care of me." Boom. And then so they put me on a match with Spike Dudley, and and Paulie likes to, he likes to test all the big guys. He did it with Gang. He did it with me. Did it with Mantar. He did it with Bam Bam. Where they beat you that first time in. You know what I mean? Kill off the big man. And so Spike did it, and he wanted me just to go in there and beat. I said, "Well, listen, let's." He just wanted me to just get beat right away. I said, "Well, listen, why don't we just make it look like it's not going to beat me? Do the reverse." Spike hits me with his finish, and then and they loved it, and then the place went nuts there in Philly. So I got my little run, but I mean, it was a sinking ship at that point. A lot of guys weren't getting paid and stuff like that. And I was trying to get my money out of the whole deal, and it just wasn't happening. And by the time by the time things all were said and done, I ended up moving from Atlanta, moving back to Nebraska, where I'm from, stuff like that. And then the flights were just too expensive from the Midwest to bring me out to the East Coast and stuff like that. So I mean, that was it, done deal. And then I mean, shortly after that, I was back in Europe, and things had just popped in England. I mean, we were making good money in England, and then, I mean, I've wrestled in 55 different countries. You name five wrestlers that that have done that. You can't even probably name one outside of me. So I mean, I've seen the world on somebody else's dime, and I feel pretty good about it. So any issues that I had, I'm less hired and fired than some of the other old guys in the business. So, but that's what territories were all about. You get hired and fired, you get moved on, then you go to the next place, and then you come back a couple of years later, and you work for them again.
Yeah, just to wind it down here, you brought up one man gang. He told a story to me when I interviewed him that he quit WCW over, or he walked out over having to lose to you, but he doesn't even remember why he refused to lose to you. Do you remember that at all?
Yeah, it was at the Citadel, and it was at the Citadel, and I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, why? I'll tell you why. He was probably getting wound up by guys like Scott Hall and a few of these other guys, and he's probably getting wound up and said, "Oh, you can't do the job to him," blah blah blah, and all that crap. And I know how it is because guys are worse. I remember when I went on with Stan Hansen. It was me and Tom Zink against Stan Hansen and somebody else in St. Louis, and Owen Hart, when Stan Hansen came in straight from the airport into the arena there in, in St. Louis, and Owen goes to Stan, he goes, "Yeah, you're doing this, and yeah, I hear you're wrestling Pia News." He goes, "Oh yeah, you want to know what Pia News said about you?" You know what I mean? It's one of those situations. Pia News said you were old and washed up and whatever, and I never said anything like that. And the thing is I went in there. We had a decent match and stuff like that. But I'll tell you what, Stan Hansen blew me up because he just had a motor like no other, right? And as a baby face, I mean, as a heel, I had a way better motor than I did as a leader, right? As a follower, you know what I mean? but we had still had a decent match and everything like that. But he was trying to show me he wasn't an old man, right? And I never, and that's the funny thing about it is I never did it. And so I know how the boys wind people up. It's happened to me in the past, and I'm sure that's kind of what happened to Gang. And for whatever reason, I worked Gang one time in Sioux City, Iowa. I enjoyed the shit out of it. I think he's a great big man. I remember watching him when I was a kid, and that's no insult because I mean he's not that much older than me or anything like that. But why he refused? Yeah, like I said, it was probably a wind up. Couple wind up merchants were giving him a hard time, and that's kind of what happened. And that shit, you'd be surprised how much that used to happen in the back in the day.
Yeah, and it still happens, but not as bad. And last question is you mentioned you wrestled New Jack. What was your experience working with New Jack?
I had no problem with New Jack. He was, some of the stuff was dangerous, of course, but I had no. In fact, the last match I wrestled him, he came off of a balcony in Marietta, Georgia. It was at least 2 stories up in the air, and he came off this balcony, and I was on one of those. I was on one of those tables, and when he hit me on the table, he didn't hurt me, but what happened is the table basically exploded, and one of the legs of the table, the top part of the leg, it came through the table and it ripped a hole in the back of my head. And so we ended up cutting off a little bit of the excess skin and just super gluing it shut. And yeah, I never even got stitches on it. It was just super good shut, and it was sterile. I never had any more problems with it, other than when I was shaving my melon or something like that. Then I had to be careful around it for the first month or so. But the scar is still there, and I can feel the lump, but it's no big trouble. But the bottom line is wrestling is not about ballet or anything like that. And there are certain things you're going to do. There are certain moments going to be more dangerous than others, and if you're going to be a professional wrestler, you have to deal with that. So I never ever complained about somebody stiffing me or somebody opening me up or whatever. I never ever complained about that stuff. If I did, it was about a joke. I'd go, "Oh, what are you doing?" And it was a joke. But I never ever got mad at anybody for being stiff because a lot of times so was I. I like to, and in fact I like being solid because I took pride in what I was doing. I enjoyed the industry so much while I was doing it. I hung out a little bit too long because my knees and my hips, and I'm trying to get all those things replaced right now. So
Well, we're glad you're still alive, at least, because a lot of your contemporaries, as you mentioned, like Kurt Hennig and Rick Rude, are long gone now. But is there anything you want to say to close this off, or anything you want to plug? Thank you for joining us, and maybe we'll have to do a part two down the road sometime.
all I want we could do a part two later on down the road, man. But I want to see you smile more. You just look too serious tonight. but but no, everything's really cool. I miss the old days, and I wish I could keep on keeping on, but it just didn't work out that way. Um, I'm I'm glad to be I'm glad to still be alive and to be succeeding as a human being outside the industry because I know a lot of guys lose touch once they leave the business. So I'm okay, and I think that anybody that is, um, if there's anybody out there that is still trying to learn this craft or and want to do something to continue or to be a superstar in the wrestling industry, give everything you got, and but remember that the business doesn't owe you anything, you know. So whether you succeed or you have a successful career, which is might be 5,000 plus matches in 55 different countries like myself, or whether you become a super TV star like The Rock or like John Cena or something like that. You don't have to judge yourself. You can be your own. You can be your own judge. You don't have to judge yourself on somebody else's accomplishments. And I think that's a great thing about the wrestling industry.
Very good. Good message for the fans. Could you close this off with a rap to end this interview?
I haven't rapped in 100 years, dude. You put me on the spot there. If I'd have known, I might have come up with something. But I will give you a yo, baby, yo. Word. Peace out. Be cool. Happy 2023. And let's come back here because I'll tell you what I do want to give you a little heads up on is me and Mantar are starting our own sports podcast. It's not just about wrestling. It's going to be about all North American sports, whether it's ice hockey or American football or college, NFL, basketball, college basketball. We're going to be starting our own podcast and maybe we can do something later on and cross promote once I have our startup date and everything like that. Right now, we're working on all the digital logos and getting everything started and set up for the website, and we're looking forward to it. And maybe Mantar and myself can come on one night and do a show with you if you're good with that.
Oh, for sure. I actually had Mantar on a couple months ago, and he was great, very entertaining, and he talked about you as well.
Well, that's great. Yeah, because I gave him his first job. I got him his first job over in Germany. So, but yeah, I'd like to. But let's talk. Maybe we can set something up where you can get us on both together, and we can tell you some stories that are a little bit more graphic than the ones I told you today.
All right. Sounds good. Well, we appreciate you having on and you coming on. We look forward to that. And thank you for joining us all the way from the other side of the ocean, I guess.
It was a pleasure, man. I'm glad we got to do it, man. You take care of yourself, and thanks everybody for listening and everybody who's paying attention. You guys have a great day and keep on keeping on.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews, match videos, or